September 12, 1944. Bletchley Park, Buckinghamshire, England. Squadron Leader Iris Pemberton stood before the blackboard in Hut 6, chalk dust settling on her uniform sleeves as the autumn rain drummed against the windows. The message intercept lay on her desk, its columns of seemingly random letters mocking 3 weeks of failed decryption attempts. She had broken Enigma variants before, working alongside the brightest minds Britain could muster. This was different. The traffic originated from occupied France, transmitted in short, precise bursts that suggested something beyond routine military communications. Her colleagues had nicknamed it Widow's Lantern, after the peculiar signature pattern that preceded each transmission, a rhythmic sequence that reminded one codebreaker of a lighthouse beacon glimpsed through fog. The war had taught Iris that patterns meant everything. Every cipher concealed not just words but the mind of its creator, the logic that bound chaos into order. Yet Widow's Lantern resisted every analytical tool they possessed, every mathematical approach, every intuitive leap that had cracked dozens of enemy codes. What troubled her most was not the complexity, but the elegance. Someone on the other side understood cryptography with a sophistication that seemed almost familiar, as if trained in the same principles, the same philosophies of concealment that governed British intelligence work. 300 miles away, in a converted wine cellar beneath a chateau near Compiègne, Hauptmann Otto Weiss adjusted the lamp over his workbench and studied the latest stack of Allied radio intercepts. At 43, he was older than most signals intelligence officers, his hair graying at the temples, his spectacles reflecting the amber glow of the single bulb that illuminated his subterranean office. The walls sweated moisture despite the September warmth above ground. He had designed Widow's Lantern in the spring of 1943, drawing on pre-war academic work in abstract mathematics that the Wehrmacht had considered too theoretical for practical application. The system employed a polyalphabetic substitution cipher nested within a transposition framework, with key sequences derived from astronomical tables that changed daily based on calculations. Only he and his small team understood. Otto knew the British were trying to break it. He counted on their attempts. Every hour they spent wrestling with Widow's Lantern was an hour not spent reading operational German communications, not tracking U-boat movements, not decoding genuine military intelligence. The messages he encrypted were elaborate fabrications, phantom troop movements, fictional supply routes, imaginary command structures designed to confuse and mislead. The irony was not lost on him. Before the war, he had attended a cryptography conference in Cambridge, had shared drinks with British mathematicians who now likely labored at Bletchley Park. He remembered conversations about theoretical limits of code complexity, debates about whether perfect encryption was mathematically possible. Now those academic discussions had become a chess match played across enemy lines, with lives hanging on every move. October 7, 1944. Iris stood in the office of Commander Hastings watching him read her report. Rain continued its assault on England, weeks of it now, turning the grounds of Bletchley Park into a maze of mud and puddles. She had slept perhaps 10 hours in the past 4 days. "You're certain?" Hastings asked, not looking up from the pages. "The astronomical tables were the key," Iris said, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Once we realized the polyalphabetic intervals correlated with lunar orbital data, the transposition patterns revealed themselves. It's brilliant work, actually. Whoever designed this understands cryptographic theory at a level we rarely encounter." Hastings set down the report. "And the content?" "Deception." The word tasted bitter. "Every message is carefully crafted disinformation, troop movements that don't exist, supply lines to nowhere. 3 weeks of our best efforts spent chasing ghosts. But there was more, and Hastings could read it in her expression. "What else?" Iris pulled a folder from her briefcase, laying several decoded messages on his desk. "The disinformation is too good, too detailed. Whoever is running this operation knows how we think, knows what would seem plausible to British intelligence analysts. Some of these fictional scenarios almost perfectly mirror real Wehrmacht operational patterns. An inside source? Or someone who studied with us?" Iris paused. "I've been through our pre-war academic records. There was a German mathematician at Cambridge in 1937, attended the International Cryptography Symposium. Otto Weiss. Published papers on polyalphabetic ciphers and astronomical key generation. He's our ghost." The revelation brought no satisfaction, only a deeper appreciation for the complexity of the game they played. Somewhere across the channel, Otto Weiss was constructing elaborate fictions, each one designed to waste British resources, while genuine German communications flowed through different channels entirely. Hastings leaned back in his chair. "Can we use this?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Iris moved to the window, watching rain cascade down the glass. "If we know it's deception, we can treat it as intelligence about what Germany wants us to believe. Every false scenario tells us something about their real concerns, their actual vulnerabilities. Fight fiction with fiction. Precisely. Iris turned back to face him. We continue decoding Widow's Lantern, but instead of wasting analysis time on the content, we study the patterns of deception themselves. What they choose to fabricate reveals what they feel they must protect. October 15, 1944. Otto sat in the Chateau cellar, reading a decoded British message that his own intelligence team had intercepted. The lamp flickered, threatening to plunge him into darkness, but he remained focused on the words before him. They knew. Bletchley Park had broken Widow's Lantern. His first reaction was professional admiration. The astronomical key sequence should have been nearly impossible to identify without already suspecting its existence. Someone on the British side possessed extraordinary analytical intuition, the kind of mind that could perceive patterns in apparent randomness. His second reaction was strategic concern. If they had broken the cipher, they would know the messages were fabrications. Months of carefully constructed deception work potentially wasted. Worse, the British might now attempt counter-deception, feeding him false information disguised as genuine intelligence. But as Otto studied the intercept more carefully, noting its origin point and transmission characteristics, a third realization emerged. The British were still transmitting responses to his fictional scenarios through their own communication channels, still repositioning resources based on his fabricated threats. They knew Widow's Lantern was deception, but they were choosing to treat it as valid intelligence. Why? He spent the next 2 hours working through the implications, chalk covering his small blackboard with diagrams and probability calculations. Finally, the answer crystallized. The British were engaged in meta-deception, pretending to believe his lies while actually studying the architecture of his deceptions to identify genuine German vulnerabilities. Otto laughed aloud in the empty cellar, the sound echoing off wine-stained walls. They were both playing the same game now, each aware of the other's awareness, each trying to extract truth from multiple layers of deliberate falsehood. It was the cryptographic equivalent of two grandmasters locked in an endgame, where every piece was simultaneously real and imaginary. November 3, 1944. Iris decoded the latest Widow's Lantern transmission, immediately recognizing a subtle shift in methodology. The message described a fictional Panzer Division repositioning through Belgium, but embedded within the fabricated data were minute variations in the encipherment rhythm, intentional irregularities that formed their own pattern. She worked through the night, isolating the irregularities, treating them as a separate cipher layer. By dawn, she had extracted a hidden message. Greetings to Cambridge colleague. The game elevates. Otto knew she had identified him. More than that, he was acknowledging the mutual recognition, confirming that both sides understood they were now engaged in something more sophisticated than simple deception. He was turning Widow's Lantern into a channel for meta-communication about the very nature of their cryptographic duel. Iris sat back in her chair, exhausted but energized by the intellectual challenge. She drafted her response, embedding it within a fake British operational order that she knew German intelligence would intercept. Within the noise of military jargon and coordinates, she encoded a simple acknowledgement. Oxford sends regards. The game continues. For the next 4 months, through the winter of 1944 and into the spring of 1945, Iris and Otto conducted a shadow conversation through layers of encryption and deception. On the surface, Widow's Lantern continued transmitting elaborate fictions about German military operations. Beneath that, hidden within deliberate cipher variations, they exchanged observations about cryptographic theory, acknowledgments of particularly clever deceptions, even occasional philosophical reflections on the nature of their work. Neither compromised genuine intelligence. Both understood that crossing that line would end the game and betray their respective nations. Instead, they explored the theoretical limits of cryptographic complexity, testing ideas that in peacetime might have been published in academic journals, but now could only be discussed through enemy cipher traffic. The war ground toward its conclusion. Allied forces advanced through Germany while Widow's Lantern continued its elaborate dance of deception and counter-deception. Iris tracked Otto's position through the origin points of his transmissions, watching him retreat eastward as the Wehrmacht collapsed. May 4, 1945. The last Widow's Lantern transmission arrived at Bletchley Park 3 days before Germany's surrender. Iris decoded it in the early morning hours, the hut quiet except for the whisper of machinery and the scratch of her pencil on paper. The surface message described a fictional German counteroffensive that both sides knew would never occur. Hidden within the cipher variations, Otto had embedded a final communication. The game ends. Knowledge transcends conflict. Perhaps Cambridge again, in peacetime. Iris sat with the decoded message for a long time, considering its implications. Across hundreds of encrypted transmissions, through months of intellectual combat, She and Otto had engaged in something unprecedented, a cryptographic dialogue that had simultaneously served their respective military obligations while exploring the boundaries of their shared discipline. She drafted her final response, knowing it might never reach him in the chaos of Germany's collapse. Oxford agrees. May mathematics unite what war divided. June 1947. Iris attended the International Cryptography Conference in Zurich, one of the first major academic gatherings since the war's end. Much of her Bletchley Park work remained classified, though cryptographers worldwide understood that significant breakthroughs in signals intelligence had occurred during the conflict. On the second day, during a session on polyalphabetic cipher theory, she noticed a man in the back row whose presentation style seemed familiar. Otto Weiss, thinner than his pre-war photographs, his hair now completely gray, was describing theoretical advances in astronomical key generation without mentioning their wartime application. Their eyes met across the lecture hall. Neither smiled, but both nodded slightly, acknowledging what could not yet be publicly discussed. After the session, they shared coffee in the hotel lobby, conversation carefully confined to theoretical mathematics and future research possibilities. "The work you did," Otto said quietly, stirring his coffee, breaking the astronomical sequences, "mathematically elegant." "The system you designed," Iris replied, "was the most sophisticated encryption I encountered during the war. It achieved something I didn't think possible, deception that became transparent yet remained valuable." They spoke for an hour, discussing cipher theory and post-war academic opportunities, two scholars reunited by shared intellectual passion. Neither mentioned Widow's Lantern directly, but both understood they were continuing a conversation that had begun through encrypted transmissions across enemy lines. As they parted, Otto paused. "You asked once, through the cipher, whether knowledge transcends conflict. I believe we proved it does. Even when nations fight, minds can still recognize each other across the darkness." Iris watched him walk away, thinking about the strange fellowship that had developed through their cryptographic duel. The war had demanded they work to deceive each other, to waste each other's time and resources. Yet within those constraints, they had found a way to engage in genuine intellectual discourse, to push the boundaries of their field even while serving opposite sides. The classified files on Widow's Lantern would remain sealed for decades. When they were finally released in the 1990s, cryptographers and historians marveled at the sophistication of both the cipher system and the meta-deception strategies employed by both sides. But the hidden dialogue embedded within the transmissions, the academic conversation conducted through deliberate cipher variations, remained known only to those who had participated in it. Iris continued her cryptographic research through the 1950s and 60s, making significant contributions to computer-based encryption methods. She occasionally encountered Otto at international conferences, their conversations always cordial and intellectually stimulating. Neither ever fully disclosed the extent of their wartime shadow dialogue, respecting the classified nature of their work, while privately acknowledging what they had achieved. In 1973, at a symposium in London, Otto presented a paper on the theoretical limits of cryptographic complexity. In the audience, Iris recognized fragments of ideas they had first explored through Widow's Lantern's hidden channels 3 decades earlier. After his presentation, she asked a question that only he would fully understand, referencing the specific astronomical tables that had keyed his wartime cipher. Otto's eyes lit with recognition and something like gratitude. His answer, though carefully phrased for the academic audience, completed a thought that had begun in 1944, interrupted by war's end, and now finally resolved in peacetime. They had proven something remarkable, that even in humanity's darkest conflicts, intellectual fellowship could persist. That minds committed to truth and knowledge could find ways to communicate across battle lines, to continue advancing human understanding even while serving opposing nations. Widow's Lantern had been designed to deceive, but it had ultimately illuminated something more profound, the possibility of scholarly dialogue, even in the midst of war. The game had ended in 1945. The conversation, it turned out, never really stopped. If you have enjoyed the story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.